my name is Lauren Hollis, and I am back for part 3 of my interview with Angela from RTO Consulting. You guys can find all of her details below. If you haven't seen parts 1 and 2 of this interview, strongly recommend that you do that. It'll be linked somewhere here. If not, it'll be down in the show notes below as well. But Angela, before we kicked off, you were like, oh, part 3, I really want to talk about self-assurance. This is a very interesting area. So we've been down the self-assurance path before in Vetland. What are your thoughts on self-assurance, direction of, the regulator, things like that? Give it all to us.
I suppose for me, self-assurance and where things are going with that is more something that we should be concerned about and acting on and looking into than the changes to standards. Like the changes to standards, yes, they're happening. There are some changes, as we discussed, around support, around resources, what have you. But I think that the most significant thing that a lot of RTOs that are existing that I work with are not aware of is that requirement to demonstrate that commitment to self-assurance. So a lot of people firstly are saying to me, what is self-assurance? What is it that we're meant to be doing? To me, it's continuous improvement. It's making sure that we're on top of and understanding firstly what our obligations are, and then looking at each of the areas of our obligations and monitoring each of those areas. Doing it in a formal way, having evidence of it, and that is probably the most important part that we're looking at from a compliance perspective is that evidence. So what I'm seeing in initial registrations is that you have a system in place for self-assurance. Then with post-initial, I'm seeing everything they ask for is evidence of self-assurance in every area of the RTO. And any other audits that I'm seeing, it's about proving that there is a self-assurance approach in the RTO, and every piece of evidence they ask for is self-assured. So one of the things that I'm thinking in my observation, and send me an email or send me a message if you know more than I do, what I'm seeing and what I'm understanding is that now the regulator's saying, look, RTO registration initially is only for 2 years. You get to test the waters, you're on probation. If you can get it right in that 2-year period, continue running on that model and keep your continuous improvement strategies and your self-assurance commitment, and keep doing what you were doing in that initial 2 year. But for the rest of the RTOs that have been registered for a lot longer than that, they're going, well, what is this self-assurance? And what's happening is auditors are coming along and saying, show us your self-assurance practices, show us evidence of it. And a lot of the RTOs are not able to do that. And that's where they're really struggling. So it's not something that's coming with the changes to standards. It's something that's here right now. And that is that we need to be showing that we are committed to managing the RTO and looking for improvements and assessing its compliance ourselves. And that's what's happening, is that need to assess our compliance is coming back to us. And that's what I hear the regulator is saying is, you audit your own RTO. You make sure that your RTO is meeting the standards.
What I tend to find in a lot of RTOs that we work with is that not necessarily that they're not doing self-assurance, but that they sure as hell aren't evidencing it. So they may be going out and having a lot of conversations with industry. They may be putting their staff through professional development. They may be upgrading their tools. What doesn't get done is documenting all of those changes in any particular place other than your emails.
A step before that, though, is that plan. I'm seeing that a lot of RTOs are doing it ad hoc, but there's no plan around it. So there's no sitting down at the beginning of the year and saying, all right, so trainers and assessors are required to do this much vet PD. And this is when we're going to review those files and make sure that we've got evidence of it. That's not happening. Or industry consultation. It may happen. There may be conversations, you're right, but there's no evidence of the planning of it. And it might not be all focused on one qualification because that particular trainer is well connected with industry. and they're doing lots of consultation, and then the others are not. So we need to be putting that plan together and making sure that plan is actioned, or else there's no evidence of it and it basically didn't happen.
Do you think it's, I mean, because I know that like whenever you talk to RTOs about it, the first thing that they're going to turn around and say is like, we don't have time. We've got, we've got fires to fight. We've got this, we've got that. Do you think it is a time consuming process for RTOs to, to plan an action? Or do you think it's just one of those things where it really just isn't prioritized? Like,
I think the time consideration and resource consideration is real. I do think that a lot of RTOs are struggling with time, and I often think that's because they're not employing enough staff.
I think it's also because they don't understand the I guess the cost benefit. Like or whenever we're talking to people, all of our tools are contextualized. So we contextualize to the state, the cohort, the the delivery method. We'll often talk to the people and they'll be like, yeah, but you guys charge like $300 or $400 more a unit. I'm like, yeah, we do. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. But let me ask you a question. When you buy this set of tools off the shelf, you've still got to have a trainer to sit there to review the tool, to then contextualize the practical assessment, which effectively means rebuilding the entire practical assessment, which means what is the time frame associated with that, or what's the time frame associated with getting, then having to deal with trainers who complain and tell you that your assessments are, SH, or what, can we just look at the cost of all of this stuff after the fact? And we've even sat down with clients and gone, they've kind of gone, well, we'd like to do this with you, but we're going to see if these get through audit first. Yeah. And I've literally turned around to them and gone, you know what? That is 100% your decision. However, I am going to let you know, if you come back to me and tell me, I've priced this out to build and develop it for you over 6 months. If you come back and tell me I need it to give it to you in 3, the price doubles.
Well, I understand, but then again, a lot of the time, it's people contacting you to do it because they can't do it themselves. A lot of trainers and assessors don't have the capacity to review assessments. I have worked with a lot of RTOs where the trainers and assessors have reviewed the assessment and they're significantly non-compliant. The trainers and assessors were not aware of what they really needed to do.
Yeah.
And it's the same with assessment validation. They've undertaken the assessment validation activity. They've ticked a box that says we've done this, but the assessments are still non-compliant. So it was a waste of energy. So it goes back to needing to understand what our obligations are, understanding the legislation. It goes back to making sure that we have the skilled people to do it. So we're not trying to get people who just are there, do the activities that need to be done. We need to make sure that people really have the knowledge that they need for your self-assurance activities to be effective, and then have a plan. And the only way that you're going to get them done is with a plan, because otherwise there's not going to be enough time to do it.
And so, with RTOs now, as you said, this is it's a good opportunity. 2024 is an opportunity for you to go back and go, okay, with our processes, do we understand the current standards? Do we understand the new standards that are coming in? Do we have a process and a plan for how how we're going to identify any potential gaps, and then 2, if we're going to fill that? How as a CEO or an owner, do you look at your organization and go, yes, we've definitely got the people in there that know how to do that? What would be your advice to owners who are looking at this and going, okay, cool, I want to do all of that. How do I know that I've got the right staff to do it?
That's a tough one. I've worked with so many RTOs, and I'm sure you have, that believe they had the right staff. I've worked with RTOs where they've had compliance people assure them that they're absolutely fine, everything's under control, they are compliant. And it's not been the case, but the owner or the CEO has not had the compliance knowledge to even identify that themselves.
Yeah.
But that's a really difficult one. And also, someone is employed as a trainer and assessor, a lot of RTOs assume that it means that they can do assessment validations, but a large number of them can't. And also they assume that those same people can write assessments and very few can. So I think it's really important that owners and CEOs actually understand what the obligations are and what the legislation is.
Yeah.
And then they actually find out if their staff are meeting those requirements or not.
Yeah. So the first step is really to kind of go, do I understand the standards? Do I understand these things? And if I don't, how do I get myself to a point where I have a rudimentary understanding of that so that I can then make sure that I'm asking the right questions and making sure my staff do have those capabilities? It's probably a really good place to start.
Without doing a self-plug, a consultant can tell you all of that very quickly. A consultant can tell you whether the staff have the capabilities to do different activities. They can find that out through interviews and also reviews of their work. An audit will also help find out where an RTO is at and what capabilities they have, external audit. But I think it is crucial that CEO or owner does understand, as you say, the principles.
And how do they find a good consultant? Like, what are some of the things like that they should be asking to figure out whether or not they've got a consultant that's actually going to lead them down the right path?
I think the most important is experience. What sort of experience has that consultant had? How long they've been around does help, but then I will say that the longer and more experienced the consultant is, the more they tend to charge. Another thing is, it does come into it, in my opinion, is qualifications. Qualifications are important because at least it sets a bit of a benchmark as to some of what they do know. But I think to choose a consultant is definitely experience, the exposure they've had. Now, a consultant that's worked for one RTO for the last 20 years is going to be quite narrow in their exposure and their understanding. But I think you need to look at what sort of exposure they've had to what sort of work they've had as to what you need as your own RTO. And
regular exposure to regulator audits as well. I find that makes a big difference.
Absolutely, I agree with you.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good spot to end on. So for those of you that need to find Angela, you can find her at www.rtoconsultant.com.au. We will also put all of the links for Angela's LinkedIn down below as well. If you guys want to follow her, if you want to ask any questions, if you disagree with anything that we've said, by all means, put it in the comments below, duke it out, do so respectfully.
Or add more to it as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, we want to keep this conversation going. Angela, thank you so much for participating in this interview with me. I found it really interesting. Thank you for putting up with our technical difficulties in part one. The joys of being online. But yeah, thank you very much, guys. You can find all of Angela's details below. She's definitely somebody worth the follow on LinkedIn. So if you're not currently following her, highly recommend that you do so. If you are looking to do an RTO registration, Angela is definitely one of the people that you should be reaching out to as well. Thank you very much, Angela. You guys have a great day.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thanks, guys. My name is Lauren Hollows for NOI Education Services.